Okay, yeah, so Maine started out as Massachusetts. Next month I'm talking about how the United States went from sea to shining sea during the James Polk presidency. So that's next month there, and it's just at the Atria up in New City where I did Jewish comics. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we do that you'll get to. Anyway, so thank you for bearing with me, being late because of the George Washington Bridge territories. And oh wait, we're going to talk about Washington in a second. My name is Evan Weiner, and we're talking about U.S. territories and the federal district. And you probably haven't thought about the differences between states, territories, and federal districts lately. Washington, D.C. is a federal district. In 1790, Maryland and Virginia ceded the territory to establish the District of Columbia as the capital of the United States. This is after a little set-to between Alexander Hamilton. How many of you saw the play Hamilton? Nobody? Oh, you have? Well, in that play, Hamilton sings about, we want the money, to Thomas Jefferson. And he says, we'll keep the financial capital in New York. You take the capital, go wherever you want with it. And they ended up in a swamp that was cut out of Maryland and Virginia. At the time, there were about 3,000 people who were living in Washington, D.C., and white men who owned property in D.C. Were able to continue to vote in either Maryland or Virginia as they did before, but that would end. Washington, D.C. is a federal district. It's not a territory. And Washington residents have more rights than territories, people living in the territories. But the federal government limits local power and calls the shots. For instance, would you want Chuck Schumer to set your school budget? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Well, he's a senator, but he's got to, and I can say the same thing about Mitch McConnell. They are senators. Why are they setting the school budget for Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I see.
Why? Why would they do that? But they do. Washington was broken when I was there a few years ago. As you can see, there's a bandage on the Capitol dome. Territories have always been part of the United States. By act of Congress, the United States, when used in the geographical sense, means the continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands. That is what it means. Those are the territories, along with the states, and of course the federal district. There are 16 U.S. territories: Puerto Rico, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, the Virgin Islands, and American Samoa, and they are fully inhabited. The rest aren't. They're used for things like testing atomic bombs, like the Bikini Atoll. And that's where the name the Bikini came from that island that they blew up to test an A-bomb. And then a couple weeks later, a woman in France, a model, is modeling, this is 1946, the Bikini, named after an island that was obliterated by an atomic bomb. More than 3.5 million people cannot vote in presidential elections because they live in Puerto Rico, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, and the Virgin Islands. But Guam is a key Pacific military outpost. In fact, it is the outpost that is depended upon to spy on or to look at North Korea and China. Not fully Americans. They are organized self-governing territories with locally elected governors and territorial legislature. Each also elects a non-voting member to the U.S. House of Representatives, or a shadow congressman or a shadow congresswoman, with no power except they can suggest something. People in the territories cannot vote for the President of the United States or the Vice President and do not have full representation in Congress. That's Washington, D.C. That is December, a December picture with the Washington Monument in the background. By the way, George Washington ever stepped foot in Washington, D.C.? The answer is probably not. Although he lived down the street, literally in Mount Vernon, Virginia. The Washington, D.C. Admissions Act, introduced by D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes in 2019 and again in 2021. It was put forth to the House of Representatives, the bill designed to grant Washington, D.C. admission into the Union as a state, and hence making it the country's first and only city-state. The bills have gone nowhere. It's a political battle. It was a political battle in Alaska to get Alaska into the United States. It was a political battle in Hawaii. Not because people aren't deserving to get into the United States, it's all about political calculus. You add Washington, D.C., that's 2 Democratic senators, 1 Democratic congressperson. So that kind of upsets the balance of power. When Hawaii came in and when Alaska came in, they came in together because they thought they would cancel out one another. Alaska would go Democrat, Hawaii would go Republican. Well, it turned out Alaska went Republican and Hawaii went Democrat. So they're looking at this purely from a selfish political viewpoint. It's a political battle. The Democrats, obviously, they want Washington, D.C. to become a state. And the Republicans are against it because it would tip the balance of power in the Senate and maybe in Congress. Washington, D.C., the district is about 10 miles. And people said, well, that can't be a state. It's only 10 miles. It's only 10 miles, 10 square miles. But D.C. has 700,000 residents. Wyoming, only 580,000. Vermont, 624,000. 4 other states have fewer than 1 million. Alaska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Delaware. And Washingtonians, well, they want to become a state because they don't want Mitch McConnell. They don't want Chuck Schumer to tell them, well, this is the amount of money we're going to give you for the schools, or this is the amount of money we're going to give you to pave the roads in Washington, D.C. We want that local control, and that's another part of the battle. So there are rights and there are non-rights. This is one, the phallic symbol. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Why does George Washington's monument look like a phallic symbol? Have you ever thought of that?
Like what?
A phallic symbol, right? I have to explain that?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Anyway, this is after the earthquake about 10 years ago in Washington, and it broke the phallic symbol. So they had to shore it up. In 1801, Congress passed the District of Columbia Organic Act, which formally placed the government of the District of Columbia under control of Congress. That's what they did. The act meant that citizens living in the district were no longer residents of Maryland or Virginia, and as a consequence, they had no representation in Congress. The presidential election, yeah, they do have a say on the presidential election. The 23rd Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified in 1961, under which the District of Columbia is treated as a state. It's treated as a state. So there's the problem. For the presidential election, you can be a state, but those 3 electoral votes always go to the Democrats. For the purposes of the presidential election, except it can't have more electoral votes than the state with the least number of electors, which would be 3, which would be, among other things, Wyoming and Alaska. A previous bid for Washington statehood was defeated in the democratically controlled House by 2-1 in 1993. Bill Clinton stayed out of the debate, but Bill Clinton was annoyed by this license plate. See what it says on this license plate? It's Washington, D.C., and it says taxation without representation. You gotta pay your federal tax, but you get no representation unless you want Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell to look over your school budget. The 51st state, if it became the 51st state, or maybe the 52nd state, the existing area would be admitted as the 51st state, but wouldn't even be that big. The new state would be named Washington Douglas Commonwealth after Frederick Douglass, and this is June 13th. The new district would be created within the boundaries of a new state. To be called the capital, the new district would encompass the White House, United States Capitol, United States Supreme Court buildings, some federal buildings, and federal monuments adjacent to the Capitol. like the Jefferson Memorial, like the Washington Monument, like the FDR Memorial, and the Martin Luther King Memorial. That would all stay inside the capital of the United States, not in Washington District of Columbia or whatever they would call that. So this would be part of the Capitol. This may not be where I was standing. The new Capitol would be for Washington, D.C., the John E. Wilson Building. It's excluded from the Capitol. It would serve as the state capitol. The new state would have 2 members of the Senate and initially 1 member of the House of Representatives. The current local representatives, the mayor and the city council, would become the governor and the state legislature. The Senate has put this on the back burner. They're not taking up the question of whether Washington should be a state right now. In fact, the Senate has done absolutely nothing with the issue. So that's where it stands in Washington. The people who live within Washington, taxation without representation, we want to be a state. We definitely want to be a state, but the people who don't live in Washington, the Congress people, the senators, don't want it to be a state, which doesn't make sense because the government is supposed to be for all the people, right? Wrong. This is San Juan, Puerto Rico, and that is the fort at the end of San Juan. As you sail into it, I spoke on cruise ships, you sail right around the fort. Puerto Rico is the United States territory. When it comes to sports, though, it's an international competitor in the Olympics, complete with teams representing Puerto Rico. But Puerto Ricans are American citizens. In 1898, Spain ceded the islands and the Philippines to the United States as a result of its defeat in the Spanish-American War under the terms of the Treaty of Paris of 1898. And there is San Juan, and that is the old fort where people just go out now and fly kites and other things. In 1917, it took 19 years. 19 years the United States had operated in Puerto Rico being a colony. They granted citizenship to Puerto Ricans in 1917. But it wasn't until the Nationality Act of 1940 that all people born in Puerto Rico were designated citizens by birthright regardless of their parentage. Oh, by the way, the United States got Puerto Rico in 1898. World War I, the United States enters in 1917, and because Puerto Ricans, some of them were citizens, they had to fight in World War I. Since 1948, Puerto Rico has elected its own governor. 1952, the Constitution of Puerto Rico was adopted and ratified by the electorate. And again, another picture of downtown San Juan, the old village in San Juan. Puerto Rico was granted U.S. Commonwealth status in 1952. Not the kind that Massachusetts has, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Virginia. It's a different kind of Commonwealth. Puerto Ricans do have access to Social Security and Medicare. And that is downtown San Juan. There. The Puerto Rican State Admission Act, introduced, would require Congress to vote on whether Puerto Rico comes in as a state, and that's depending on whether or not Puerto Ricans pass one more referendum to either accept or decline the congressional offer of statehood. Puerto Rico is the home to about 3 million American citizens. They're bigger than 20 states. Now the calculus here is that the Republicans probably will pick up some people in the Senate and in Congress. And that's why the Democrats don't necessarily want Puerto Rico right now. There are some possibilities ahead for Puerto Rico. Statehood, which is favored, continuing status quo, which is not favored, or independence. But most Caribbean countries are struggling to survive economically, and there is a movement by the president of Barbados now to kind of form the United States of the Caribbean. We'll see where that goes. The Senate and Congress have always been slow to act on Puerto Rico's future. In fact, some Puerto Rican citizens don't seem to know exactly what they want. But in November 2022, a referendum put before the voters asked a simple or no question. Should Puerto Rico be admitted immediately into the U.S. as a state? About 52% said yes, a little more than 52%, 665,505 voters, 592,671 voters said no. It's a 3 and it's a 4. It's about 4% a swing now saying yes, but nothing's going on. Meanwhile, there is nothing going on in St. John's, Virgin Islands. How many of you have been to St. John's in Puerto Rico? St. John's and St. Thomas. That's where the pirates operated way back in those days, and they were, a lot of them were Jews who were annoyed at the Spanish Inquisition and decided to get their pound of flesh back, which they did. The onset of World War I brought reforms to a close, and they were basically desolate islands. They were isolated, they were exposed. During the submarine warfare phase of World War I, the United States thought that the islands might be seized by Germany as a submarine base. And so they talked to Denmark. Can we buy them from you? Like, yeah, we really want to buy them from you because, not that we really want them, but we don't want the Germans to get them in submarine bases. So after a few months of negotiations, the United States would buy the Virgin Islands, which includes St. John, St. Thomas, for $25 million. Oh, $25 million in gold coins, and this is basically what the Virgin Islands is about. You sit there and you drink and you eat and you go out and get roasted, and then you go into the water to dry off, and then you repeat the process. You eat, you drink, you get roasted, they turn you over, and then you go in the water. The deal was finalized on January 17, 1917. And the United States and Denmark, they exchanged their ratification treaties, and that was it. The United States took possession March 31st, 1917, and it was called the Virgin Islands of the United States. And this is basically what you do. You sit under that, and you go in the pool. Or rather, you could go in the pool. They have pools adjacent to the beaches in some places. There's never really been much of a push for statehood in the Virgin Islands. The Virgin Islands looked at statehood in 1984 and 1993, but just weren't interested. And at this point, there is still no interest. Virgin Islands depends almost solely on tourism. Cruise ships are there in and out. The problem with cruise ships is simple. You might have 8 cruise ships in one day in St. Thomas, but people who are on the cruise ship don't leave much money behind. Because they can eat in the cruise ship, they paid for their booze package in the cruise ship, and other than maybe in terms of the cruise ship, taking a taxi to one of the beaches, it's not much money left behind by tourists. This is Guam, and if North Korea ever does launch an atomic attack on the United States, it's going to be against Guam for a number of reasons. During the Spanish-American War, the United States captured Guam on June 21st, 1898, under the Treaty of Paris, signed on December 10th, 1898. Spain said, you could have Guam, effective April 11th, 1899. After World War II, the Guam Organic Act of 1950 established Guam as an unincorporated, organized territory of the United States, provided for the structure of the island's civil government, and granted the people U.S. citizenship. The governor of Guam was federally appointed until 1968, when the Guam Elective Governor Act provided for the office popular election. But this is what Guam is all about for the United States. This is it. Soldiers, 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 soldiers. It's a nice place in terms of beaches and all, but strategically, it's all about soldiers. The Pentagon's plan to relocate thousands of troops stationed on the southern Japanese island of Okinawa to Guam. That's a plan. Guam is close to North Korea and China. In 2017, Guam was on alert for a possible North Korean nuclear attack. It's just a 30-mile long tropical island. There are only 100,000 people living there, 160,000 people. Certainly, it's one-fourth the size, population-wise, of Washington, D.C. And it's the home to a large Air Force and naval base. But people do go vacation to Guam because they got the palm trees, they got the water, they got the liquor, they got the food, they got all that stuff, right? So given that they got all that stuff, well, there you go. Statehood, which would give Guam all the rights and burdens of being a state, albeit a small one, is, I guess, possible. Free association, this would be another option with administrative power like Palau in the Marshall Islands. Independence, which would make Guam a minuscule sovereign state with 160,000 people. I guess they could go that route. Probably not. This looks nice, doesn't it? The Northern Mariana Islands. I mean, here's somebody swimming in a lava pool. That looks kind of nice, doesn't it? You want to do that tonight? Sure. Sure? Let's all go to the Northern Mariana Islands.
You have to drive.
Ready to go? Well, yeah. You don't go to Newark Airport because George Washington Bridge is the best. Anyway, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, a self-government commonwealth in association with the United States, 22 islands and inlets in the western Pacific Ocean. The Commonwealth is part of the Mariana Islands, a chain of volcanic mountain peaks and uplifted coral reefs. The Mariana chain also includes the politically separate island of Guam to the south. They're part of it, but they're part of, they're actually territory of the United States. The Northern Mariana Islands, or the CNMI, emerged from the trust territory of the Pacific Islands, which the United States ministered on behalf of the United Nations from 1947 until Palau, the last member of the TTPI, chose its own political future and became a political country in 1994. The federal law making the CNMI a U.S. territory passed in 1975. That is Saipan, which is another area that the United States controls. CNMI adopted its constitution in 1977. First constitutional government took place in 1978, and it became it went under United States laws and regulations in 2007 in terms of minimum wage, in 2008 in terms of immigration. In June 2009, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security takes over the CNMI's immigration and border controls. The Northern Mariana Islands does not have voting representation in the U.S. Congress, but they have somebody since 2009 that represents them in the House of Representatives. They have a delegate who can get involved in the debate but can't vote on the floor. The Commonwealth has absolutely no representation in the U.S. Senate. And that is American Samoa. It's an unincorporated, unorganized territory of the United States. The United States has not provided an organic or charter act setting forth a system of government. The U.S. Secretary of the Interior, who has jurisdiction over the territory since 1951, gave American Samoa the authority to draft its own constitution in 1967. They are not citizens. They are U.S. nationals. There's a difference between a national and a citizen, and they can't necessarily just pick themselves up and live in the United States and reside in the United States. In terms of becoming citizens. What they are nationals, they can get to the United States, but they don't have the same rights as citizens. The Samoa, American Samoa, became a U.S. territory by deed of secession in 1900. The Matai, or local chiefs of the Tutuila, the largest island in American Samoa, ceded the island to the United States in 1900. Manu followed in 1904. Swain Island joined the territory in 1925 by an act of Congress. Authority over American Samoa was initially placed within the U.S. Navy, which oversaw the territory until 1951. So that's the district, and those are the territories of the United States. But how can a territory or a district become part of the United States? Not everyone here was part of the United States. They first became colonies, which ratified the Constitution. They became territories, and when the territories became big enough, they applied for statehood. This is the lower 48 of the United States, which was made whole by James Polk in the mid-1840s. So you carve out the states. Some territories existed for just a short time before becoming states. Others remained territories for decades. The shortest lived territory, the Alabama territory, only 2 years. While in New Mexico and Hawaii, it took 50 years to become a state. Seemed fairly easy to make that jump from territory to state. Now, not everybody started out as a territory. You got the 13 colonies. That was Britain basically saying these are the 13 colonies. But there was this thing called Vermont. And Vermont was an independent republic. It was not one of the 13 colonies. If it was, it would have been the 14th colony. But there were only 13 colonies. So this was an England problem. In the early 1700s, the royal governors of New York and New Hampshire made grants of land to settlers in an area that would later become Vermont. Well, this is a problem, and they got to go back to London to get an answer. And the king initially said, well, you know what? That colony had the right to grant land grants and land claims. These people wanted no part of New York and no part of New Hampshire. The king eventually would say, you're New Yorkers. The land was to become known as Vermont. Initially started out as the New Hampshire grants. And the areas all looked alike. That is Bennington, Vermont. And it doesn't look too much different than the Adirondacks, doesn't it? Except it's called the Green Mountains there, and the Adirondacks there, and New Hampshire. Which led my cousin to ask me a question as we were driving to Bennington, Vermont a number of years ago, 5 years ago or so. He said, during the Revolutionary War, this is all mountains and trees. Did they make an appointment to have a battle, like Ticonderoga? The main reason for declaring independence, Vermont, they wanted no part of those New Yorkers. You know how New Yorkers are, right? Would you want to be would you want to be a member of a club that wants you to join? No. Groucho Marx. Because of the Revolutionary War, go ahead. We're busy here. You want that? You take it. That's you, Vermont. During the American Revolutionary War, Vermont did declare its independence separately from the original 13 colonies. It was a nation. Although the Continental Congress said, no, you're not. We're not recognizing it. During the Revolution, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys and some other like-minded politicians approached the British-controlled Quebec about joining the province. After all, there is only a river that separates that land from Quebec. However, they were rebuffed pending the outcome of the war. There's another thing. Those people, the Quebecois, they hated the Brits, but they hated the Americans even more because they were godless hedonists. And so they were French Catholics. They didn't want any part of godless hedonists. There is Vermont, again, Bennington, Vermont. Vermont outlawed slavery and granted the right to vote to all adult males, whether they owned property or not. The Founding Fathers said the only way you could vote is that if you're a white male who owned property. That's what the Founding Fathers said. If you're a woman, in fact, you're a woman, you had less rights than a male in an insane asylum. You had no rights as a woman. Maybe Betsy Ross did. Maybe Martha Washington. Vermont had its own money. It had its own post office. But in 1790, they gave in, and after 14 years as a country, they became a state. This is Biloxi, Mississippi.
Well, before you go on, can I just ask, where does Saratoga enter into this?
It's in New York.
I know it's in New
It
York.
doesn't enter at all. It was always in New York.
I know it was always in New York.
Yeah.
But didn't they have a big say in this?
No, not really.
No?
Not
Thought
really.
they did.
No, not really. New York said, we don't need you anymore. Biloxi, Mississippi. And that's the Mississippi Territory. It was created by U.S. Congress, 1798. Strip of land extending for about 100 miles north to south from the Mississippi River, also to the Georgia border going the other way. Territory increased in size in 1804, and in 1812 it went from Tennessee to the Gulf of Mexico. Driving in Alabama. In 1817, the western part achieved statehood as Mississippi. The eastern part became Alabama. And basically, you started getting cities. You had enough population, Washington was interested. Louisiana Territory, that was bought by Thomas Jefferson from France in 1803. And, well, a lot of states came out of Louisiana Territory. The territory of Louisiana, or Louisiana Territory, was incorporated territory of the United States that existed from July 4th, 1805 to June 4th, 1812, when it was renamed the Missouri Territory after Louisiana became a state. Throughout most of U.S. history, regions that were admitted to the U.S. states prior to admission, they were territories or parts of other territories. As the United States grew, the most populous parts of the organized territories became states. Montana was part of the Louisiana Purchase. That is Glacier National Park on a clear day. I guess it wasn't a clear day, was it? Logan's Pass in Glacier National Park. Elevation 6,646 feet. And if you are in the metric system, it's 2025. The states that were carved out of the Louisiana Territory: Louisiana, Missouri, Arkansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma. Also, parts of Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Minnesota. Oh, Maine's an interesting story. It's so interesting that I do a completely different 60-minute talk on Maine. It's Bar Harbor, Maine. And one of the reasons I broke it up, or broke out of this to Maine, was the Missouri Compromise. Maine started out as Massachusetts, except those people down in Boston didn't pay attention, and people up in northern Massachusetts says, they're not paying attention to us, let's get out of here. And it became acute in 1812, during the War of 1812, when nobody from Massachusetts, the Boston area of Massachusetts, bothered to protect Maine. So by 1819, they decided to be a state. The nation, in 1819, the United States had 11 free and 11 slave states, creating a balance in the U.S. Senate. Missouri's entrance threatened to basically upend the parity in favor of slave interests. So Missouri would be entered into the Union as a slave state, but people in Congress said, well, we've got to balance it out. So they said to Maine, you're in. You're a free state. And they wanted to be separated from Massachusetts. That is the Florida Territory, which bounced back and forth between European powers. Even after the American Revolutionary War, Spain got it back in 1783. After the War of 1812, Spain got it back in 1815. But they would finally sell it to the United States in 1819. The territory of Florida, an organized incorporated territory of the United States, existed from March 30th, 1822 until March the 5th, 1885, when it was admitted to the Union as the state of Florida. That is Jupiter, Florida, and the lighthouse in Jupiter. Originally, the Spanish territory of La Florida and the provinces of eastern and western Florida ceded to the United States in 1819 in the Adams own this treaty, and it was governed for a while as the Florida Territorial Council, by the Florida Territorial Council. I spoke at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library. Your tax dollars paid for me to represent the United States before 16 foreign nationals. 3 Russians, 3 Venezuelans, 3 Turks, 3 Indonesians, 3 Venezuelans. You start connecting the dots. Not exactly friendly countries to the United States. Canadian and 4 Americans, and they asked this guy to represent the United States. Your tax dollars at work. Would you have me representing the United States before foreign nationals? See, she said no, but I did. Anyway, there were 6 flags over Spain. Anybody go to Six Flags Adventures Park? That's where it comes from. Spain, 1519 to 1685 and 1690 to 1821, when the Mexicans kicked them out of all of Mexico and northern Mexico, which was Texas. France, 1684 to 1860 for Fort St. Louis, and 1800 to 1803 as French Louisiana. Mexico, 1821 to 1835. The Republic of Texas, 1836 to 1845. They didn't want to be an independent country. They wanted to be part of America, and they became part of America in 1845. United States from 1845 to 1861, 1865 to present, and the Confederate States of America between 1861 and 1865. The Republic of Texas was a sovereign state in North America that existed between May 2nd, 1836 to February 19th, 1846. Mexico said, no, you're a rebellious province. We're not recognizing it. Funny thing about this is that Mexico invited Americans to settle in that part of the world in the 1820s, and then they put an immigration ban against Americans going into Mexico around 1827, 1828. That problem has not been solved, has it? But anyway, that used to be Texas, and you can see there's New Mexico, and here's Colorado, here's Arkansas, and this is all Oklahoma, and eventually they settled on the Rio Grande as the border. The annexation of the Republic of Texas into the United States led to immediate statehood. It came in as the 28th state on December 29, 1845. That led to a war. Mexico lost, ceded its claims to Texas, and the Rio Grande border was accepted by both nations as the border, the Rio Grande River, in 1848. Ah yes, there is my friend Jeff Beeran, and there is the Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. How many of you have been out there? I've been out there numerous times on business. Jeff is my buddy out there, and we end up eating right behind there and up here in Alioto's. All the time we eat at Alioto's. Why? I don't know, but we eat there all the time when we're there. California was a republic. Do you know that California was a nation for 25 days? Texas actually had representatives. Vermont had representatives. Listen to this story. June 14th, 1846, a ragtag group of about 30 gun-toting Americans entered Samoa, a small town in the Mexican territory of Alta California. Prepared to take the town by force, they instead sat and drank brandy with Colonel Mariana Vallejo of the Mexican Army and accepted his surrender. All it took was a little brandy. For 25 days, California was an independent nation called the California Republic for 25 days. And there is James Polk. You get the whole story next month about Polk and Texas and California and the Northwest Territories. 2 days later, the Bear Flag Revolt officially ended as California was absorbed into the Union. The Californios ceded Alta, High California, to the United States in 1847 with the Treaty of Cahuenga, and California officially became the 31st state because there was gold in them there hills. in Sutter's Mill, on Sutter's Mill and the American River on September 9th, 1850. The President, James K. Polk, made no desire of his wanting to annex California and Texas in the Pacific Northwest. The gold rush, gold in them there hills. Just before California's formal annexation, gold was discovered in Coloma near Sacramento, and that changed California from a region that was sparsely populated with Hispanics and Native Americans to a bustling economic center controlled by white Americans. Keep Portland weird, the Oregon Territory. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842 partially delineated the northeastern U.S.-Canadian border, but the border of the Oregon Territory was unsettled. Oh, Oregon Territory. 1844, all black people were ordered to get out of the Oregon Territory, the expansive territory under American rule. It was actually under co-rule, but with the Brits, but the Americans took that end, and the Canadians north of the 39th parallel took the 49th parallel took that land. But anyway, 1844, all black people were ordered to get out of the Oregon country, the expansive territory under American rule that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Rocky Mountains. Those who refused to leave could be severely whipped. The provisional government law declared by not less than 20 or more than 39 stripes to be repeated every 6 months until they left. No black was ever lashed. And this is the Columbia River, and this is where Britain wanted to take all the land, which is now Washington and Oregon, and then give the Americans the land south of the Columbia River. The territory of Oregon existed from August 14th, 1848 until February 14th, 1859, when the southwestern portion of the territory was admitted to the Union as the state of Oregon. The region was divided by the UK and the US in 1846. The area would include states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, as well as parts of Wyoming and Montana. And this is the original Oregon State Constitution, which said we do not want any blacks in our territory. And you would figure, okay, it would go away. Well, it doesn't. In 1859, Oregon became the first and only state to enter the United States that prohibited blacks from living in the state in its constitution. The exclusion clause was rendered moot by the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, although it was not repealed by Oregon voters until 1926. Other racist language in the state constitution was finally removed 21 years ago, in 2002. That is the New Mexico territory, and you can see it was split into two eventually. The territory of New Mexico was organized as an incorporated territory of the United States and existed from September 9th, 1850 until January 6th, 1912, when it was admitted into the Union as the state of Mexico. It was the longest lived organized incorporated territory of the United States, lasting approximately 62 years, but Puerto Rico has been in its status for now 125 years, so, but it's a different status. And there is Arizona, and that is outside of the Phoenix area. The Arizona Organic Act was an organic act passed by the 37th Congress on March 12, 1862 by Representative James Ashley of Ohio. The act provided for the creation of the Arizona Territory by the division of the New Mexico Territory into two territories along the current boundary, New Mexico and Arizona. Anybody ever been to Pike's Market in Seattle? Across the street's the original Starbucks, you know. The original Starbucks is across the street. The Washington Territory split from Oregon, and March 2nd, 1853, until November 11th, 1899, when the territory was admitted to the state of Washington as the state of Washington, and it included the entirety of modern Idaho, parts of Montana and Wyoming, before attaining its final boundaries in 1863. By the way, British Columbia They had a chance to become part of the United States, turned it down. Why? They didn't like those Americans south of the border, and they wanted to put up a fence to keep Americans out of British Columbia. Idaho, that is a sewer cover in Idaho, Coeur d'Alene. The territory of Idaho was unincorporated territory of the United States, existed from March 3rd, 1863, till July 3rd, 1890, when it was admitted as Idaho. And that is Anchorage, Alaska. And you can see the distances from Anchorage to other places. Russian officials began to worry that U.S. settlers would one day overrun Alaska. And these officials also feared losing the defenseless colony of Russia to Great Britain, a naval power that had defeated Russia in the Crimean War. They're still fighting in the Crimea. This time it's Russia and Ukraine. 1853 to 1856, and left it ravaged with death. Bald eagles in Sitka, Alaska. On March 30th, the U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward signed a treaty with Russia for the purchase of Alaska for $7 million. Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, President Andrew Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. And this was the last capital, Sitka, that was turned over to the United States, and that was the 4th of July, 2017. The Alaska Territory, or the territory of Alaska, was organized as an unincorporated territory of the United States, existed from August 24th, 1912 until January 3rd, 1959, when it was admitted to the Union as the state of Alaska. The territory was created as the District of Alaska, May 17th, 1884. Mark Twain stood there, as did I. And there's a little plaque saying that Mark Twain was there. That's in Oahu. Hawaii is one of 4 American states that was an independent republic. Vermont and Texas, 2 of them, along with California. Along with Texas and Vermont, Hawaii had formal international diplomatic recognition as a nation. As the Hawaiian sun's rise. The Queen, Liliuokalani, announced plans for a new constitution in 1883, but a group of Euro-American business leaders and residents formed the Committee of Safety to stage a coup d'etat against the kingdom and seek annexation of the United States. And that is Sanford B. Dole. They wanted the pineapples and other stuff. They wanted Hawaii, and they got it. The American lawyer, Sanford B. Dole, president of the Republic when the provisional government of Hawaii ended on July 4th, 1884. The administration of President Grover Cleveland commissioned the Blount Report, which concluded that the removal of the Queen had been illegal, but too bad. The United States first demanded that the Queen be reinstated, but the provisional government said, no way, no way. That is the Waimea Canyon, which looks like a quilt with all the colors. In 1898, the Republic of Hawaii was annexed by the United States, became the territory of Hawaii, aided by the lobbying of the sugar interest. The Hawaiian Territory existed from August 12, 1898, till August 21st, 1959, when it was admitted to the Union. The 50th state, the state of Hawaii. That's Buffalo, New York. That's the William McKinley statue. The President William McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo in 1901. And my son and I were scouting out state schools for him to go. He ended up in Binghamton. The United States government, or Congress, agreed to grant Hawaii a popularly elected government. William McKinley signed it into the law, an act to provide a government for the territory of Hawaii, also known as the Hawaiian Organic Act of 1900, which established the office of Territorial Governor. And that is the palace, that used to be the Royal Palace. In 1900, Hawaii was granted self-government and retained the Ailona Palace as the territorial capital building. Plantation owners and capitalists who maintained control through financial institutions found territorial status was convenient because they were able to import cheap foreign labor. Such immigration practices were prohibited in many states at that time. There would not be voting delegate to the United States Congress, but every other rights were given to the people in Hawaii that other citizens in the United States got. The annexation of Hawaii to the United States made selling agricultural products to the mainland much more profitable since there were no tariffs. Well, you know, hey, I'll knock over the Queen so we can make some money. And that's what happened. Workers began to discover they had rights. In 1920, they waged the first multicultural strike. Shifting political alliances between 1902 and 1930 permitted Cuba to have a larger share of the United States sugar market. They got 45%, while the Philippines and Hawaii and Puerto Rico shared just 25%. Pearl Harbor. The United States started being interested in Hawaii in the 1840s. Strategic place. They built Pearl Harbor. 1993, the U.S. government passed a joint apology resolution regarding the overthrow. It was signed by the President Bill Clinton. The legislation apologized for the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom and acknowledged that the United States took Hawaii unlawfully, but hey, you know what? It's a state now, and that's me with the governor, Linda Lingle, in 2005 in Maui. There were former territories that have been let go, like Panama, Colon, Panama. The former territories included Cuba, 1898 to 1902, the Panama Canal Zone, 1904 to 1976, and the Philippines, 1898 to 1946. The Hubbard Glacier is part of the United States and Alaska. The last territories to become states were Alaska and Hawaii, 50th state. That happened in 1959-1960. Washington, D.C. has statehood advocates. On November 8th, 2016, District of Columbia voters overwhelmingly said, we want statehood. 86% of the people who voted said yes to the proposal. The district's future could be determined soon or never by the Senate. Puerto Rico's future status is still being debated. None of the other territories have ever reached statehood. Thank you so much. Any questions, any comments about this little travel log that I just put you through? You got to see all the places I got to go to. So, any questions or comments? Okay, so we will see you next month. Sorry I was late, but I got you out of here by 10 after 4. So, have a good day.
Thank you. Good.
You go to the bar. You go to the bar.